Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Bring On the Bad Guys, the show where we take a look at the most nefarious villains in comic book history. Of course, now focusing on Marvel villains, the past few shows. And today we're looking at the villains that debuted against Nick Fury in the 60s, which means that they could have come from basically both eras of Nick Fury that took place in the 60s. One, Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, which was the World War II comic, and that involved Nick and the Howling Commandos going up against mostly the Nazis in World War II, and then also Strange Tales and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., which had more to do with Nick being recruited to become the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. when S.H.I.E.L.D. was first created in the 60s. So we're going to take a look at those villains now. And this week, a couple exceptions were made on the list just because it's kind of a thinner list of villains. A lot of the villains that Nick faced in World War II were essentially just opposing armies, whether that be the Nazis or perhaps Japan if they were fighting in the Pacific. So we're going to take a look at some of these villains here from World War II and also Nick's early S.H.I.E.L.D. days. Starting with number 10, no, that's not the chameleon you see. That's the Agent of 1,000 Faces, and as such, we actually don't know his real name. He first appeared in Sergeant Fury, number 58, and that was in September of 1968. And he was born presumably in Germany. We believe that that is where he originated from, and was created by Arnold Drake and Dick Ayers. His personality on the power scale is a 3. His powers are a 1, mythology 2, design 3, and cultural impact 1. And to review what these numbers mean, each category on the power scale, you can earn up to 5 if you're a villain, 1 being the lowest, obviously. Personality, mythology, and let me correct that here. Personality, powers, and design should be fairly obvious. However, mythology and cultural impact may not be. So mythology is from inside the pages of comic books, so origin stories and basically everything else that the comics cover. And cultural impact is everything that goes on outside comics, so video games, movies, TV shows, etc. So the Agent of 1,000 Faces, his personality is a 3, and he earns that because he, of course, is a master spy and can imitate virtually anybody. So his personality is very fluid and flexible. Powers 1, he doesn't have any superhuman powers. He's a master of disguise, so he does not really rank higher than a 1 in the power scale. Mythology 2, he's only had a few episodes of a few comics that he's actually appeared in, and hasn't really shown up since the World War II days. And he did have a fun few stories there, including his origin where he actually infiltrates Adolf Hitler's inner circle just to prove to Hitler that he can be a master spy. And again, as much as he looks like the chameleon and kind of has a sinister base layer face of the white mask and featureless eyes and nose and lack of mouth. Pretty creepy, which is a 3. It's not actually based on the chameleon or have anything to do with him. So cultural impact remains at 1 because the Agent of 1,000 Faces has not appeared outside the pages of comic books. Moving to number 10, we have the Druid. And the Druid has one of the best secret identity names in comics, I believe. It is Dreadmond Cromwell, and I have not ever met anyone in real life named Dreadmond, so I think they just wanted to call him Dreadmond so they could call him Dreadmond the Druid. Because otherwise, why not just go with Edmund? But Dreadmond, classic name from the Kirby and Lee days at Marvel. He first appeared in Strange Tales 144, when Nick Fury was starring as one of the leading characters in that. May 1966 was the month that story was released. His place of origin is Caribou, Maine, in the United States, and was created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. Getting to his power scale, his personality sits at a 3. He is a somewhat charismatic leader, not as charismatic as perhaps someone like the Red Skull or Doctor Doom, but he is quite a successful cult leader, literally has a cult following, and is usually able to keep his followers somewhat enthralled by his presence and power. Speaking of power, that sits at a 2. It's really mind-based powers that the druid has to call on, mind control, hypnosis, things like that. He does have a pretty significant knowledge of alchemy and potions, just not quite at the same level of someone like Diablo, who is primarily known for fighting against the Fantastic Four. And to that case, the druid has not really been known as a master alchemist, although he does have experience in that realm. Design 2, and you just look at his costume here, he has some pretty obnoxious looking headgear, which I can't imagine was very easy or pleasant to wear. I can understand as like a ritual thing, but he likes to wear it out in public, so to speak. So, not really a suave look there for the druid. Cultural impact 1, he has not appeared outside the pages of the comics. For his mythology, which also sits at a 2, he, again, pretty minor character. Aside from Fury, he's fought Captain America, Wolverine, Wolfsbane, Werewolf by Night. Apparently you have to have a W to face the druid later on. He started his villainous career, again, as a cult leader and decided to target Nick Fury and tried to assassinate him early on in Fury's career with S.H.I.E.L.D. He sent a bunch of his cultists to do the job. They, of course, failed because they're a cult and S.H.I.E.L.D. is the master intelligence agency of the entire planet. So, not really a fair fight for the druid. Number 8, we have Colonel Klaue, or Colonel Claw, if you want to pronounce it in the anglicized format that he later changed it to. His real name, Fritz Klaue, or Fritz Claw. He first appeared in Sergeant Fury number 39 in February of 1967. And he was born in Belgium and was obviously, as you can see by this picture, recruited into the Nazi army during World War II. He was created by Roy Thomas and Dick Ayers, and power scale, personality 2. So he's a solid leader, if you want a military leader, not that intelligent. So personality only gets a 2. His powers are a 2. He's an expert military tactician, but he doesn't have any superhuman powers other than a bionic steel fist, which is just pure coincidence that he has, and he has the last name of Klaue. So, mythology 3, and his mythology kind of ticks up to 3, whereas maybe it would usually sit at a 2 because of his famous son, who is the notorious Ulysses Klaue, who appeared in the Captain America Civil War and Black Panther movies. So Colonel Klaue is Ulysses Klaue's father, and he did have some of his own run-ins in Wakanda and with the Black Panther. Design 2, I can't really give good designs to Nazi uniforms, but at least his bionic fist looks kind of cool. So there's that. Cultural impact 2, he has not appeared in anything outside the pages of comics, but again, his son Ulysses has, so there is that connection. So that is enough to move his cultural impact up to a 2, especially because if you look in the MCU, Ulysses Klaue's last name is actually spelled like Fritz's. So they, in the comics, anglicized it to make Fritz's last name Klaw. But in the MCU, that never happened. So Ulysses keeps his last name as Klaue, which is Fritz's original last name and spelling. Moving to number 7, and this is one of actually 2 groups on this list. I don't usually like to put groups on the list because they tend to have shifting rosters, and it's harder to say, oh, this group was a particularly great nemesis of this hero or team, and maybe at this time they weren't because they had inferior members, but Nick Fury's list here is a little thin on significant villains, so we're going to make a couple exceptions this time around. The Blitzkrieg Squad first appeared in Sergeant Fury number 14 in January of 1965. Of course, their place of origin was Germany, probably Berlin, because they were commissioned by Mr. Hitler. Stan Lee, Dick Ayers, and George Roussos were the creators behind this team, and they were conceived as a foil to Sergeant Fury's Howling Commandos. And if you're familiar with the Howling Commandos, they each had a little certain trait that kind of made them stick out and make them unique amongst not only the American Army, but also within their own ranks. So the Blitzkrieg Squad, when they were formed by Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, specifically to stop the Howling Commandos, Strucker intentionally recruited men to act as foils for the Howling Commandos. So Manfred Adler, Siegfried Farber, Ernest Mueller, Otto Rabi, Ludwig Schroeder, and Fritz von Sydow were the Blitzkrieg Squad. And Farber and his kind of brute strength and fighting style, that was to counter Dum Dum Dugan. Adler was very precise, very well bred. He would counter Percy Pinkerton. Mr. Mueller, Ernst Mueller, was raised in the more rural parts of Germany, so he went up against Rebel Ralston, who was from the south in the U.S. Otto Rabi was a flautist, however you want to say that, would go up against the bugle of Gabe Jones, and the blue-collar Schroeder would match up with Izzy Cohen, while Fritz von Sydow was more of a debonair master of drama, and he countered the Commandos' Dino Manelli, who, of course, was a former actor in the United States before the war. And there's actually a quite excellent story with the Blitzkrieg Squad, and that stands out amongst a lot of other adventures where they really were not so much of a match for the Howling Commandos. And that adventure was they are trapped essentially in this town that's burning down because of how much it's been shelled. And the focus is a battle between Strucker and Nick Fury, which is amazingly intense. But also these other smaller battles are going on between the Blitzkrieg Squad and the other Howlers. They only stick at a 2 for mythology because that's really the only great story that they are in. And of course, not being in World War II anymore, they don't really show up much throughout the years. The personality for them is a 3, a bunch of different members, of course, so we kind of average it out. Powers 2, they are, of course, very well suited to war, each according to their own tendencies and specialties, but no superhuman powers, so they get a 2. Design is a 3, and that's because they were actually able to make them more unique looking while still wearing the standard Nazi German uniform. So again, kind of like the Howlers, where you see, Pinkerton wearing a beret, Dum Dum Dugan has his bowler hat. They have the instruments. Gabe Jones, for example, has his bugle. They did make them stand out in those ways. So they get a 3 for that. Cultural impact 1, they do not appear and have not shown up on TV or in video games or anything like that. So they also get a cultural impact score of 1 for a total of 11 points. Moving to number 6, we have the Hate Monger. And the Hate Monger you might think of more as a Fantastic Four villain, and you'd be pretty much right. But again, we're kind of bending the rules a little bit for Nick Fury to get him some more nefarious foes, as we'd like to call them here. The Hate Monger, we don't really know. Well, let me correct that. He doesn't really have a real name. He's a clone of Adolf Hitler. So perhaps his real name is Adolf. I'm not sure what clones really go by, especially Hate Monger. Place of origin, Berlin, Germany, of course. And he first appeared in Fantastic Four number 21 in December of 1963. And that issue was also Nick Fury's first appearance outside his World War II comic. So he shows up and asks the Fantastic Four for help and points them to the hate monger, and they eventually end up, of course, defeating him. And at the time, the reveal would like to make us think that he's actually Hitler, but much later it's revealed that Arnim Zola, the scientist who worked with Red Skull during World War II, had created clones of Hitler, and the hate monger was one of them. So the hate monger was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. His personality is a 2. He's a clone, so he does have Hitler's personality, which unfortunately is a quite charismatic personality. However, he's a clone, so it's not his own, so I can't really give him too much credit for that. Powers 2, he has some skill with emotional manipulation, which he uses his gun, which he calls the Hate Ray, to facilitate. But since that's a weapon, and he doesn't actually have any other skills aside from being a master strategist, he will stick at 2 for powers. Mythology 4, and that is because, surprisingly, there can be a lot of twists and turns when you're dealing with a character who is a clone of one of the worst people to walk in history in real life. So he's worked with the Red Skull. He pops, he's not a big enough character to really have to worry about consistently, but he does show up in some very interesting scenarios, either against the Fantastic Four, Captain America, Namor, and is usually able to somehow sneak away to, unfortunately, fight another day. Design is a 2. He somewhat improved his style a little later on, but it's mostly this kind of chainmail mix with a hood, and the hood sometimes has an opening for his mouth, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes he wears gloves, sometimes he doesn't. It's kind of a crapshoot as to what he's going to show up as, except for he usually does have an H on his chest. So not really creative. Cultural impact 2. He hasn't really shown up outside the pages of comics. However, because it was such a surprising moment at first with Hate Monger being revealed to be a Hitler clone, although first they thought he was actually Hitler, that I didn't quite feel it was fair to leave him at a 1 in that case, just because it was such an unusual thing for a character like that to show up in the comics. So that was an iconic situation for Marvel back in 1963. Moving to number 5, we have Scorpio. And Scorpio has a really interesting and confusing history. So real name, maybe Jake Fury, quote unquote. Jake Fury is Nick Fury's brother. And once we get to mythology, we'll get into a little bit of why this is so confusing. His first appearance was in Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. #1. That was in June 1968. And his place of origin was over in France. And he was created by Jim Steranko. Now, actually, let's talk about his history a little bit before the power scale. So, Scorpio's story has changed a bit over the years. The one thing that's consistent is that Scorpio, the title, is given to a member of the Zodiac or Zodiac Cartel. It's a organized crime syndicate. Has gone by a few different names. And each member of the inner ring of Zodiac is assigned a name in of one of the signs of the Zodiac. So Taurus, Scorpio, Gemini, etc. And this particular Scorpio, his story has been changed a bit over the years, and it may change in the future, but we'll see what happens. Originally, it was thought that Scorpio was Nick Fury's brother Jake, and that he had a vendetta against his brother and wanted to make it in the ways of crime instead of the ways of law and order, like Nick did. But much later on, it was revealed that actually he is not Jake Fury, but a life model decoy that was accidentally created in one of the early days missions of this cartel that both Jake and Nick were forced into helping. And that was one of the first incarnations of the Zodiac cartel. And in one of the missions, which was Jake Fury's mission, he inadvertently created a life model decoy of himself. So basically an exact replica, not a clone, but a technological replica. And that was in France, which is why we have that as his place of origin. And then there's kind of this haze about, okay, when did Jake Fury come back from hiding? The real one, which was Jake, which was the LMD, life model decoy, and kind of going back and forth. So it's a little bit of a head spinner, but there's some pretty cool stories involved. And I definitely always appreciate the sort of, the more intentional and well done retconning and transforming of stories. So that's an interesting thing to note about Scorpio. Personality 2, as a life model decoy, you don't get a lot of credit for personality when you're basically just a copy of someone else. Powers 2, most of his powers are due to the Zodiac key, which gives him enhanced strength and durability, and can also initiate projection blasts. And the Zodiac key is a ancient artifact that grants power to its welder, and it is the source of contention between the Zodiac cartel, Nick Fury, the Avengers, and also Daredevil early on. Mythology 3, we talked about that a bit already. Design 2, I just feel like a guy with a cool name like Scorpio could have been a little bit better in the design department. Instead, we get an orange and yellow and red-faced kind of, although that might be part of his mask. Full bodysuit here with a scorpion adorning his head, and maybe they didn't quite want to go the route of making it as over the top as Scorpion from the Spider-Man comics, but I feel we could have tried a little bit more here. So he gets a 2. Cultural impact 3. And Scorpio has appeared in the Avengers United They Stand animated series and the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series. So he will get a 3 as far as that goes. And of course, he also, being related to Nick Fury, has some tie-ins with that as well. He has also fought the Defenders, Nighthawk, Moon Knight, and a handful of other people throughout his career as Scorpio, and also just as a rogue, mentally unstable life model decoy. Number 4, we have Mentalo. And Mentalo, another great name, Marvin Flum. What a name for a supervillain. Just kind of gives you the sense of he's a guy who's kind of grasping at straws a bit here. But Mentalo, his origin, actually North Dakota, Watford City, North Dakota, first appeared in Strange Tales 141 in February of 1966. And he was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. He has a personality score of 3 and also a power score of 3. In fact, he's 3 all the way across the board except for design, which is a 2. He's kind of worn some very clunky uniforms and costumes over the years. This picture actually isn't really a uniform he wears. It's more of an artistic depiction of his mental powers and their capacity to confuse heroes, in this case, the X-Men. So that's why he gets bumped down to a 2 for design. He is a mutant with the powers of telepathy, mind control, and illusion generation. He also can probe into people's minds, which is not a pleasant experience, of course. And he was originally a SHIELD recruit. They were developing what they called the Psi Division. So it was psychic agents who allegedly, hopefully, whatever word you want to use, could monitor threats to Earth by using their skills of telepathy, mind reading, ESP, etc. And Mentalo, not being the most upright individual, decided that he would rebel against SHIELD. He contacted a rogue SHIELD agent known as the Fixer and basically tried to take down SHIELD to get the attention of Hydra, who we will talk about later. Of course, Mentallo was not successful. However, one of his goals actually was fulfilled, as Hydra was attracted by Mentallo's plan and skill, kind of, in carrying it out. He wasn't a complete abject failure, so they were alerted to his existence, and they recruited Mentallo, and Mentallo actually rose through the ranks of Hydra quite a bit. He's also worked with the Red Skull, Silvermane, MODOK, Juggernaut, Norman Osborn, the Hood, AIM, so he really jumps around from team up to team up because he's not quite strong enough to stand on his own. He has not appeared outside the pages of the comics. However, you may be wondering why he gets a 3 in the cultural impact category, and he gets a 3 there because there are very few villains and comic book characters in general that have bands named after them. There's a band down in Texas called Mentallo and the Fixer, named after Mentallo and the Fixer, who we will actually get to right now. Yes, the Fixer, Paul Norbert Ebersol, and he first appeared in Strange Tales 141. Sound familiar? Yes, that was the same first appearance as Mentallo. So, Mentallo and the Fixer, good band name, also good team up of villains. He was originally from Dayton, Ohio, in the U.S., and was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The Fixer has always been an underrated villain for me. He has a very interesting personality in that he really loves his machines, he loves tinkering, he loves creating, he loves inventing. And especially in his later days, he would almost prefer to be left alone in those situations where he can just work out things with his machines and assemble them and put them together and all that fun stuff. And so he's very intelligent and, again, often just wants to be left alone with his own intelligence to work on things. His powers are a 3, and that is mostly due to his bionic physical enhancements, but because he is so intelligent in terms of robotics and electronics and computers, he is always a danger to come up with something that you wouldn't expect. In his first story, when Mentallo is observing him, he actually breaks out of prison using just a handful of objects from around the prison, and he uses them to blast a hole in the wall of his cell and escape by way of specially prepared rocket boots. And very MacGyver-like. So if you read Strange Tales 141, it's a pretty fun sequence with the Fixer breaking out of prison. And of course, his mythology is very much tied in to his personality and powers, where he's very rarely a front lines villain, but really likes to work behind the scenes. And he was an original member of the Thunderbolts, and he's been an advisor to Baron Zemo and Professor Power, so he's always been a little more comfortable in the mental arenas of life than the physical ones. So, Design 3, Fixer has had quite a few looks over the years. They mostly have to do with some sort of glasses and some sort of bionic enhancements. Not quite in the way of someone like Cable, but technologically advanced enough that make it kind of a fun, trippy look at the same time. So it gets a 3 for that. Cultural Impact 3. Again, a lot of that has to do with the band, Mentallo and the Fixer, because he hasn't appeared in pages... Excuse me, he has. I apologize. He's a playable character in the Lego Avengers video game, and then he's also appeared in a few animated TV shows. I was looking at the wrong section of notes. Iron Man Armored Adventures, Avengers Ultron Revolution, Marvel Disc Wars, he's shown up in all of those. And again, a pretty prominent role in the Thunderbolts team, which is rumored to show up in the MCU one of these years. So that's the Fixer at number 3. Number 2 is Baron von Strucker, of course. Wolfgang von Strucker. He first appeared in Sergeant Fury, number 5. And his place of origin is Bavaria, Germany, on the good old planet Earth. And he was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. His personality sits at a 4. Baron is a very charismatic individual. Of course, so in the MCU, you see the Red Skull kind of break free of he calls it Hitler's shadow, which is something he kind of does in the comics, but someone else who does that, I think in a more captivating way, is Baron von Strucker, because von Strucker straight up deserts the Fuhrer's army and shows up halfway across the world much later and starts developing the group Hydra, which it's not the first itineration of Hydra, as we will later find out in comics, but it is the first modern incarnation of that group. So he's a very strong leader, very persuasive, and very intelligent. His powers sit at a 3, and that is due to a few things. He has a healing factor, and he has an item called the Satan Claw that he wears on his hands that allows him to project and manipulate energy. He's also a military expert and a very adept hand-to-hand combatant. And he wears a monocle, which is also good for distracting people, I think. So he's got a decent set of powers, but not really too far into the superhuman realm. Mythology 3. He's never really been Marvel's most exciting character, but he has had some solid stories. Of course, once you get out of World War II, he has a lot of Hydra stories to go through. LMDs he deals with, life model decoys, as we talked about before. He's gone up against Captain America, Doctor Strange, and the Avengers. Quite a laundry list of achievements by the Baron without actually having the clout of someone like Loki or Doctor Doom or Magneto. Design is a 3, and for a lot of his career, the Baron just wears usual clothing, but while he's with Hydra, he of course has their green and yellow outfit. So he gets a 3 for design. Sometimes he has some cool looking stuff, sometimes really not so much, so he gets a middle of the road verdict as far as that goes. Cultural impact 4. And of course, that is because he appears in the MCU in Captain America the Winter Soldier and Avengers Age of Ultron. He also shows up in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show. He's made the rounds on television, aside from the MCU. Animated series he's shown up in include Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Ultron Revolution. He also is the main villain in the TV film Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., starring David Hasselhoff. And he is the primary antagonist in Captain America Super Soldier, aside from, of course, Red Skull. And he also shows up in Lego Avengers and Marvel video games. So that's Baron von Strucker. And then we move to number 1, which, again, we get to the kind of exemptions here. So usually I steer away from putting a organization on this list because organizations like Hydra or AIM, they encompass so many different people, and I usually like to focus on individuals as villains as opposed to gigantic groups. Gigantic groups can have different motivations for different things, although Hydra has remained pretty single-minded in their intentions. Hydra, I have to make an exception for and put him here because they are so influential, and they also are basically Nick Fury's primary antagonist. And of course that includes people like von Strucker, Viper, who we went in detail for in the Captain America portion of this show. And Hydra has been almost above and beyond all other villainous organizations in the Marvel Universe. So, like I said, AIM, them, the Hand, Hydra supersedes all of them in their influence and their storylines. And they came to be in Germany originally, although there are a few Marvel stories that get into more ancient times and stretching back to places like ancient Egypt and Medusas and Gorgons and stuff like that. But this incarnation of Hydra first appeared in Strange Tales 135. That was in August of 1965. And that was when Nick Fury was starring in those pages and was just learning to become head of S.H.I.E.L.D. Hydra was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Dick Ayers. And of course, modifications have been made to them throughout the years. And as with most groups, I put the personality as a 3 because you have some really great personalities in Hydra and you have some complete morons. So middle of the road there for 3. Same thing with powers, because a lot of Hydra doesn't have superpowers, but we do have some super villains who are enhanced or superhuman in some way that are part of Hydra. So, for example, Viper, Baron Strucker, the times where Red Skull has meddled with Hydra, so it happens. Mythology for Hydra has a very ancient history, according to some Marvel writers. Even if we just take their more modern role, they are behind a great deal of discomfort for your typical everyday resident of the world. So they've got a lot of interesting and devious stories where they are behind some pretty vast schemes. They have had a few different leaders, a lot of different leaders, but a few different that would be prominent. Von Strucker, of course, Madam Hydra, aka Viper, Red Skull, Baron Zemo, the Gorgon, Kingpin, Silvermane, the Fixer, who we talked about a little bit already, have all been involved with Hydra at one point or another. Arnim Zola, another one, of course, that helped push things into motion. And, of course, we have the nefarious Captain America Hail Hydra panel that people were very upset about before they read the whole story and realized it really wasn't the big deal they were making it out to be. Design 4. So their standard outfit, of course, is the green and yellow with black piping in some places. And the flexibility in their outfits has really allowed for some artists to do some cool things with them. There's a really fun Hail Hydra cover with Venom on it in Hydra green, and Captain America's quote-unquote Hydra outfit is kind of cool looking. There's some Hydra versions of superheroes that have had some fun outfits as well, so they get a 4 in the design department, especially because their logo is actually pretty cool for a villainous cult-like organization. And cultural impact for them, of course, sits at a 5. They have a major presence in the MCU. Of course, Captain America, the First Avenger, they show up first with Red Skull as their leader. And, of course, Winter Soldier, they show up with Pierce and Winter Soldier being the primary agents in terms of that story. Age of Ultron, they've shown up significantly in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on television. They've been in Captain America Super Soldier and Spider-Man Web of Fire in video games. Lego Marvel superhero games, they typically show up as goons, and their leaders like Strucker show up. They've also appeared in The Incredible Hulk. These are all animated shows: Incredible Hulk, X-Men Evolution, Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Hulk and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Ultimate Spider-Man. So they are all over the place. And some of that, I'm sure, is due to the fact that if you need an organization that has a lot of goons out there for cannon fire that can just be kind of wiped out in a brawl by the heroes, then Hydra's got your checklist taken care of. But that doesn't take anything away from the significance of their organization, really. So they sit at a 19, which leaves them at number 1 on this list. So we are going to quickly review Fury's nemesis. Number 10, the Agent of 1,000 Faces. Number 9, the Druid. Number 8, Colonel Claw or Clow. The Blitzkrieg Squad is at number 7. Hatemonger at 6. Scorpio at 5. Mentalo at 4. The Fixer at 3. Baron Strucker at 2. And Hydra at numero 1. So that's it for today. As you see, I've got my Twins hat on because it's opening day this week for baseball, so I'm super pumped for that. So we will see when I get to next week's episode, which is going to be the X-Men. Some of my favorite villains and heroes have been in the X-Men universe and stories, so I'm super pumped for that. So subscribe, comment, do all that fun stuff, and we will see you next time.